Hello everyone. So in the last lectures, we talked about Greek mythology and Greek religion and Greek poetry, Homer and Hesiod, and how these could be thought of as precursors really to Greek philosophy. How these could be a sort of earlier attempt at developing a cosmology. But of course, they did not develop cosmology in a very systematic way or in any way that we would recognize in these modern times. So in the very first lectures when we were talking, when I was giving an introduction to this course, so I said that Aristotle said that philosophy began in wonder. Now, if you just think of that sort of idea, that philosophy began in wonder, when we started wondering about things and we started wondering how, the world came to be, where did it begin, where is it going? But, I mean, mythology and religion also began in wonder because they're also asking the same questions. They're coming up with answers which are different from the ones that philosophy, as you will see, will come up with. But myth, poetry, narratives, these are narrative ways of looking at the world, but these also began in wonder. Human beings began to wonder, okay, where have we come from, why are we here, what is our purpose? So in fact, mythology and religion did begin in wonder as well, if we are going to think of beginnings in that sense. So what makes philosophy different? And if we even go back to Aristotle himself, he would say that, well, it's not just simply about, all humans, we read out that line, the first line of metaphysics, which was all humans by nature long to know. They have this sort of, this yearning for knowledge, this sort of stretching towards knowledge. It's not simply a stretching towards knowledge, but what sort of knowledge? What Aristotle would say, it is where philosophy began was when it started looking for, all-embracing, generalized, general solutions. In the way a modern scientist would look for general laws. Not just like to explain this phenomena, what can I come up with, but rather, can I have a general law which would explain this sort of a phenomena in any context? So we could say that philosophy really, began in wonder, but only when it started giving answers which brought with them a certain degree of generalization, which myth does not provide. Because in myth, what you have is you have a personal sort of setting every time. You have a personal god, like in this case, it is raining, or there is thunder, or there is lightning. It's this personal sort of whim, caprice, or anger, or whatever of this particular god, and it's a personalized god. And which means that every single phenomena has a personalized experience. It rained at that point in that battle because, Zeus was thinking about whatever, one thing. He was angry about that one thing that his wife did or something, right? But it does not give any general explanation for why it rains in general, or why do we have thunder, why do we have lightning. So the beginning of philosophy and the beginning of Greek philosophy is what we are looking at here, was with wonder, let's say. We accept Aristotle's view. But not just that, it is let's say it's a necessary but not sufficient condition, right? And also, there was this, we have already talked about this conviction that there is an underlying order beneath the chaos of events that we see around us. And this is the next step, really, because the world we see around us is chaotic. And we talked about it when we talked about the Homeric gods, that, the gods don't give us a place really, any power to dictate our circumstances. And in fact, most of us experience our life in ways in which it feels really determined, very determined by necessity, by all kinds of circumstances. We're trying to live, often enough, and many of us are trying to live from day to day, trying to survive somehow, and nothing seems to be in our power. There are other powerful people who have, who dictate the course of our lives. We don't make our own laws. Think about that. I mean, we are told that these laws now, with the advent of philosophy, we are told that these laws were made by our ancestors, but We haven't made them, right? And in some ways, these ancestors, and that's why these gods become like ancestors, right? Who laid the laws? The gods laid the laws, which means that, the gods become some kind of an ancestral sort of authority to whom we should turn. If, like we say, okay, where did this come from? This came from the gods. Now we'll say, where did this come from? This came from, the first people to lay the laws. But again, now we have, with history, we now trace them back to people whom we think of as humans, but like also greater humans, these legislators in some way. But gods in that sense are pretty similar. And it's not simply, laws for human interaction and, laws of the city, of the state. Rather also, laws of nature originally, they were thought of as something that the gods would have set. So, religion does not entirely disappear even when we start looking for causes and when we start looking for underlying order beneath, the chaos that we experience as our lives. But it sort of gives an inception to start thinking in some ways without the interference of the gods, without the immediate interference of the gods, right? So every phenomena doesn't need to be explained via, the one god or another interfering directly into human affairs, because, again, it's a level of arrogance in some ways to claim that the gods are so interested, if there are any, in human affairs, that they are like, looking at every single thing and thinking, oh yeah, I will, help this person, but not that person. I will support this person because they pray for me, while that person who did not pray for me, is out. So this kind of a the move that we see with philosophy is a move away from these religious explanations that we have been looking at towards more rationalistic and cosmological views, and cosmological in the sense that to understand order from within it, right? To understand nature from within it. So there is, we saw with Hesiod as well, there is a kind of creation of order, and it's in some ways Hesiod can be read as like a barely, disguised cosmological view. You have Gaia and Uranos, so you have like Earth and the sky, and then you have Eros that comes in, and that makes it a bit anthropomorphic because Eros is one of the original gods who causes this sort of sexual reproduction in nature. So nature again becomes a kind of zoological thing. If you think about it, there is nothing here that says that there needs to be this kind of a reproduction. I mean, we could have been looking at plant life rather than animal life. In fact, the word phusis, nature, actually is related to the word phuo, to grow. Right, so anything things that grow and that grow by themselves, or so it seems to us, are part of nature. So the fact that in Hesiod, to explain the world, he did have like it does sound like natural, but at the same time, what's going on is a kind of human or animal sort of anthropomorphic element of nature. Gives it too much, let's say, right? It makes it too human, too specific, and that means that it still remains a mythological solution rather than a natural solution. So with the philosophers that we'll be looking at in like all the next sort of lectures, but at least with the first few, the natural philosophers, or the physikoi. Physikoi comes from physis, again, from which you have the word physics. With them, there is a search for an arche, for a beginning, and at first came chaos, was, the Hesiod one, but that chaos, again, we've discussed it enough anyway in the previous lecture, which you can watch. But the search for a beginning of the beginning of what? Beginning of the world, and the world is seen as a cosmos. Right, and what is a cosmos? A cosmos is an ordered whole. It's an ordered system, right? There is a structure to it. There is an order to it. And that means that they are abandoning slowly, not very fast. And we still haven't done it even now in our present day. So, it did not happen within like a few years or a few centuries even. So they're abandoning mythological solutions to problems concerning the origins of the world. So there were mythological solutions before, which we have discussed. And they start slowly abandoning these mythological solutions to the origins of the world, origins of nature, the nature of the universe, and the processes in nature, right? You have all these processes in nature from, think of it in like a very wide spectrum of processes, which you can imagine immediately. You have, of course, rain and thunder and lightning and hail. You also have things that are much more regular, like sunrise and sunset, and what looked like the movement of the stars. So all of these are processes in nature, and these processes, rather than explain them via mythology, the first philosophers are looking for solutions which are more sort of natural, more rational, more cosmological, more generalized. Let's think of it in terms of generalization, in more general terms rather than in more sort of specific human personalized terms that mythology has a tendency to do. So, when it comes to the question of faith, there is still a question of faith and belief out here. So earlier the belief was in the stories, the narratives of the gods, and now you have a belief in the structure of the universe, the idea that the universe does come from one thing, it is structured by that one thing, or many things we'll see with the pluralists, and the belief that nature does contain solutions for or explanations for herself within herself, right? That nature is not something that is incomprehensible entirely. So there is still a faith, right? There is a faith in nature's capacity to sort of explain herself, or rather our capacity also, where there's a belief, stronger belief, I think, in our capacity to understand nature and to understand nature via nature, right? Without recourse to mythological solutions, which hardly give understanding. They give nice stories, but understanding is, well, they give a sort of understanding, but it's a bit difficult to generalize from it. So now what we have is, we have a few things. We have nature, we have causes for nature that we are looking for, origin of nature that we are looking for, understanding of nature that we are looking for, and our tool is observation, and in the beginning, we didn't have all the scientific equipment that you have in your labs. So, it was often enough just the naked eye, the ear, like our senses, and then some first tools that you'll see, like, for example, a compass that was built by Anaximander. We'll look at that later. So you had, some basic tools, and you had your, human senses, and more importantly, you had human reason, right? The human capacity to reason out things, to use logic, to come to an understanding of phenomena via rational sort of thinking, and to come up with explanations via reason. So when we think of the philosophy as beginning in wonder or curiosity, yes, it begins in wonder or curiosity, but it uses a specific method to go ahead with it. It's not just wonder and curiosity. It also sort of uses a specific method, and it is wary of other methods. It's wary of turning to traditional gods, turning to mythology. So what it is doing is, it is using a free debate of reason and asking why and demanding generalization. And from there, it is trying to come up with answers to these questions, and these really big questions, like, what is the genesis of all existing things? Is the world made of like a single substance, a single matter? And this is not something, for example, that you would have in mythological solutions that we talked about, because these were personalized gods, even though you have Gaia and Uranos, which are sky and the earth, but they're personalized, so it's not like Gaia and Uranos are they are the begetter of the rest of the gods, including, for example, Kronos and Rhea and Okeanos and Tethys, and we're talking about all these gods. So they are, let's say, the begetters, the generators of them, but they're not, you can't say that they are through and through that. It's not like you have, that Gaia and Uranos themselves transform. There is some kind of a transmutation of matter of Gaia and Uranos into, Okeanos and Tethys, or Erebus or Tartarus or whatever. So you don't have this kind of a clear-cut clarity or this abstraction, which in which you are looking for an ultimate matter, this arche, but arche not in the sense of, our first father or our first mother, but arche in the sense of the original substance which constitutes everything. It's a different question, as you can see. So the question of what is the world composed of is a philosophical question, and in fact it gets philosophical solutions rather than mythological solutions. And what they turn to, the original philosophers, and we have talked about this already, but we'll keep coming back to it, was logos. Now, logos is something that you also have in mythology, because logos can simply mean any kind of story, a narrative, an account. You have all that, but here logos is also an idea of an explanation, an account, or a definition, which gives a description, but at the same time, in that description, explain things. So it's a more complete account. The idea of logos, as philosophers use it, and it's very varied again, and you'll see especially when we go to Heraclitus, things get a bit complicated. But what we have with logos then is this kind of a desire for an all-embracing account, an all-embracing explanation, which gives a definition, a description, but explains through and through. So the first philosopher that we look at who is credited to be the first philosopher by many, though some say his student was next, is Thales. So next video, we'll talk about Thales. All right, thank you.